Prof-It is brought to you by StopToShop.com, your ultimate source for Pokemon singles, tins, boxes, and cards from a variety of other games too. Type in the coupon code PROFIT in caps with a dash, and you'll sweeten the deal with a 10% discount on your full order. If you're looking for cards, make the stop at Stop to Shop. Unown Q is a pretty interesting card. He's used in about 90% of decks today because of his Pokepower Quick, which lets you attach to a Pokemon and give them one less retreat cost. This saves you from bad starts like Uxie and Azelf, lets you attack a turn earlier, and come back into games that you normally would have had some trouble with. But there's a problem about Unown Q. He only has 30 HP and a 10 weakness to Psychic. Now, the way current rules work for Pokemon, are if your last Pokemon is knocked out, you lose the game. So, imagine if you start with your 30 HP Unown Q. Ironically, a Pokemon that's used to help save bad starts is actually a pretty bad starter himself. Now with our current format, there's a lot of popular cards that can knock out Unown Q for 1 energy before you even get to draw a card. That's cards like Luxray, Garchomp, and Ambipom. They can all knock you out with a double colorless energy right away. Then there's Pokemon like Sableye, which are even worse. Sableye lets your opponent go first if he's their starter, and with the darkness energy, they can knock you out with Overconfident. Then there's the problem with the Psychic weakness. Pokemon like Uxie, Azelf, and then even stranger ones like Coughing, Skorupi, and Nidoran. They can all knock you off for 1 energy. Then there's Pokemon like Spoink, Volbeat, Voltorb, Psyduck, just random stuff that can do 30 damage for 1 energy right away, first turn, before you get to draw. Now, imagine you start with Unown Q going first. Well, you can draw a card, but if you don't get another basic, then they get to play trainers on their first turn going second. Then they can play something like Broken Time Space and Evolve, knock you out with things like Skiploom, Flareon, Gyarados, Wigglytuff, all kinds of stuff that evolves. But then I thought, if you're going second, they can do things like play Plus Power, play Poketurn with Crobat G, or they can attach an Expert Belt to their Pokemon, meaning that you can lose in the first turn with Unown Q to pretty much everything. Don't you see a problem with this? Hey Prof-It fans, and welcome to this week's episode of Prof-It. Now today, I'm going to do something a little different than my past episodes. Instead of talking about a deck analysis or a tournament report, I thought I'd talk about the problem of donks and things that we could do to fix them. Now, call them donks, first turn KOs, or whatever you want to call them, losing on the first or second turn can get to be pretty frustrating. I'm sure if you've played a competitive Pokemon trading card game that you've either donked or experienced a donk, and I'm sure you're aware of the threat that it poses to your game if you start with just 1 or 2 basics. Today, I'm going to talk about different ways that the format could be changed to take donks out of the game. I hope it's interesting and informative to you guys, and be sure to provide with any feedback that you have after watching the episode. Check it out. Some people might argue that donks are a part of the game, and playing a deck to abuse this, or just taking a donk when you can, isn't wrong. And I agree with that. If you're playing the game to win, and the game presents a situation for you to win easily, taking that option isn't wrong. However, in my opinion, the fact that the option of donks even exists is wrong. I think for the most part we can agree on this. Here's a list of problems that donks create. They make games go down to a coin flip. A majority of donks happen on the second turn, because that's the turn you're allowed to play trainers and supporters. Many decks designed to donk are banking on going second, thus reducing a lot of games down to the luck of a coin flip instead of skill. Donks make for boring games. They're over in a minute, and they leave both players sitting around with nothing to do. Who wants to be that guy to say that their game ended in as little as 30 seconds? I know I don't. Donks are also extremely uninviting for newer players and younger players. Let's face it, most players get into collecting and playing Pokemon cards before the age of 10. It's just not fun for new younger players to enter a tournament atmosphere where they can lose before they even understand what's happening. Most players learn from structure decks, and the speed of competitive metagames versus the speed of structure decks right now is just too hard to prepare someone who's just learning the game. So, for a while, I've thought of some rules to help prevent the problem of donks to eliminate their presence in the game while still keeping Pokemon interesting and fair. This has been a heated debate in the Pokemon community for a while, so there's been a lot of proposed ways to fix this problem already. I also asked you guys on the JWittz Facebook account, and combined, here are many changes to rules that could possibly help prevent donks from our game. Best 2 out of 3 games for Swiss rounds. One way to help prevent a donk from determining your game outcome is by having your games determined by best 2 out of 3 match. That way, even if you get donked turn 1, the loser will have the option of going first or second, just like in top cut rounds. This solution is pretty effective, and it's even been used today in several tournaments outside of the United States. However, because the United States has by far the largest tournament size, most events don't have the time to extend their matches to the length to fit the best 2 out of 3 games. It probably wouldn't work with just 30-minute rounds that we have now, and in Europe, many people feel that even 45 minutes isn't always enough for best 2 out of 3, and some have Swiss rounds as long as 60 minutes. With the United States tournaments taking as long as 12 rounds when we get to states and regionals, we just couldn't reliably fit the events that we do in one day. And even then, games are still decided by donks. Another option that's currently being used in Japan with the release of the black and white sets is that you can use trainers and supporters while playing on your first turn. This rule, if anything, eliminates the random factor that the coin flip causes. However, it just won't work for our format. With all the SP tools that we have, along with Sableye, who can force you to go first, donks will be even easier to create for both sides. In Japan, they're playing a Heart Gold Soul Silver On format, so they don't have the speedy tools that we do with the SP tools and broken time space. What I'm hoping is that we receive Japan's rules when we get their same format. However, if we get this rule with our current format, it would actually be bad for the game. Things would just get even faster. Another alternative change to Japan's rule was brought up on Facebook, and that would take the rules intended for black and white and make them fair for our format. The rule would be that trainers can be played on turn 1, but you can't attack on the very first turn of the game. It would allow player 1 to set up first, but player 2 to attack first. I feel like this is a potentially more balanced format. You could still get donked with a bad hand, but it'd allow you to at least get set up if you have a supporter in hand, instead of just passing and watching yourself lose. Another option is having an optional mulligan per game. This way, if you look at your hand and it's just rotten, you could shuffle it in for a new one at the expense of letting your opponent draw an extra card to start. I feel like this would be a nice option to have for the game in general, and it's definitely something to look into. However, sometimes changing how somebody sets up doesn't prevent the possibility of a donk. If you guys remember, when I was playing Rob Downs with Uxie, he was able to clear my field of 4 Pokemon in one turn, one of them being Dolga-G, and the other 3 with 70 HP. This means that unless you have either 5 Pokemon, a Spiritomb or Ghastly start, or 3 Pokemon and a Call Energy, you could still suffer the threat of losing to an Uxie deck going second. That's a pretty specific setup, and it gives Uxie a great run in a metagame with little Vilegar. For this reason, I'm interested in formats that eliminate the ability to win from eliminating your opponent's Pokemon altogether. I know that we're used to having this option, but it's possible that eliminating it could be good for the game. Here's a suggestion that I got on Facebook. It's a simple elimination of donks in general, stating that you can't knock out your opponent's last Pokemon on the first 2 turns. I don't particularly endorse this one because I believe that if you have the resources to get a knockout, you deserve a prize. However, I do like the idea of eliminating the possibility of a donk altogether. The next one is one that I personally advocate. The idea is a rewording of the bench out rule to this. If your opponent ends their turn and has no Pokemon in play, you win the game. Basically, it allows your opponent to keep playing and try to come back, instead of picking up their cards and accepting a loss. The only awkward thing about this is that it would mean you would have to play down a Pokemon in the active position instead of playing them on the bench. But it's not a hard rule to teach, and I really don't think it affects the game in a negative or unfair way. A player who has no Pokemon in play is naturally at a disadvantage, so getting to try and come back to the game is a fair rule. If your opponent can't find another Pokemon, they still lose the game, but it makes the turn 1 wins so much less possible. I can't think of a deck that gets an unfair advantage from this rule, and I really advocate it as a great way to stop donks. In the meantime, your best chance to stop donks is to run decks with either Call Energy or Spiritomb, and to play as many basics as you can on your first turn, even ones like Uxie that you might want to save up for later. Donks can be frustrating, and what I'm hoping is that players can come to a majority consensus that it's bad for the game. And then maybe Pokemon USA could do something to change our rules to get them out of the format. As always, thanks for watching today's episode of Prof-It. Good luck at the last weekend of City Championships, albeit 2, and hopefully you don't get donked. As always, have a nice day. Peace.